Laughter is the only thing that'll keep you sane. And this world is crying more and more every day. Don't let evil get you down in this madness spinning round and round. I want you to live forever underneath the sky so blue. I want you to live forever underneath the sky so blue.
Well, hey, good morning. Anybody else emotional after watching that? Just getting emotional, yeah, just one of those things. Hey, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Morgan. I'm married to Kelly. We have two little girls. Taylor is turning 6 in a couple of days' time, which is amazing, and has flown so fast. I can't believe she's 6 already. And my other one, Laken, is 3.5. It's amazing to have a little family and be able to raise some kids. No one gives you a manual, and so it's something that you kind of learn as you go through life. But this series isn't just for parents. This series is for anyone who has a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of people in their lives. And so we're going to define a couple of things this morning and go through that. Before we get there, though, my interest in generations, this idea of that there are different groups that are wired in different ways, that they perceive the world in different views, different ways that they see these things, started a couple of years ago when the leadership of this church, as I was a volunteer, asked me to start an environment called Transit here. And Transit is for grades 6 to 8, and you might hear that and go, grade 6 to 8, that is so weird, it's different to the school system, it's just something odd. Maybe your child is in Transit at the moment and you're wondering, why that age group? Why is that such a weird age group that we've chosen to do that in? It really comes down to their age being 10 to 14 years old. I discovered as I started looking into this environment, looking into what we were doing with these kids and what this age group was like, that there's no other time in a child's life than at the ages of between 10 and 14 that there is things going on neurologically that are there are more neurological pathways that are forming during those 4 years than happen in the first year of birth. Now, in the first year of life. First year of life, you know, learning to walk, you're learning to talk. There are all these things that you're developing, skills, but there are more neurological pathways happening between 10 and 14 than happen right at the beginning of a child's life. And so if you've got a teenager and they're between 10 and 14, that is why they react a different way to the same situation on different days. It's because they have a whole bunch of wires in their head that are disconnecting and trying to reconnect. And so that might sound like science to you. You might completely have tuned out by now, but that was what got me interested in this idea of helping the next generation win, of helping this group of 10 to 14-year-olds where they're going through a whole bunch of changes in their life that we're able to, as parents, as teachers, as leaders, be able to help them win as it relates to their faith. And I think that that age group, 10 to 14, is probably one of our most important opportunities that we have as the local church. And so we're diving into the series called Helping the Next Gen Win, and so we want to define a couple of things. But before we get there as well, I want to give you just an overview of the generations, that we would go back, and we've all heard these terms. Some of you might know what generation you fall into. Some of you might not know what generation you fall into. And I'm going to give you some information, and I'm not trying to put you in a box. Please hear me here. I'm not trying to put you in a little box and say that you are exactly that way. What I am trying to do is create a little bit of a platform that we can all have a discussion about this morning. And one of the things that social scientists have do, in fact, there are companies that just study the generations. The social scientists have kind of tried to bookend where a generation begins, when a generation ends. But that can vary between anything from 5 to 10 years. And so you might hear your birth date and think, well, I fit into that category, but I relate more to another one. That's probably because they're just trying to create some groupings that we can have these social conversations about as we go along. So let's kick off with a little bit of a recap of the generations. The first one is the Great greatest generation. Tom Brokaw was the man who, he was a television news anchor. He coined this term as the greatest generation. They were born between 1930 and 1946. They were called the greatest generation because they went to war not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And so they were a great, great generation at the beginning of that. Do we have any greatest generations with us? I said, do we have any greatest generations? No offense, sorry. The next group around there is the baby boomers. Baby boomers were 1946 to 1964. What happened with, they were called the baby boomers because the soldiers missed all their ladies, came home from war, and there was an increase in the birth rate. So baby boomers followed the greatest generation. The next one, a lot of things have been said about this generation. Generation X, you might recognize some of those things in that montage, the collage on the screen there. Generation X was known as a highly entrepreneurial generation. They've moved out. They were one of the first generations to interact with a computer and be able to use the computer to work with as well. They're 1965 to 1985. One interesting thing about them is their original term was actually called the baby busters before they were coined as Generation X, because the birth control pill was introduced in the early 1960s, and suddenly the birth rates decreased heavily into the 70s and the 80s. The next one is the Millennials. In fact, this morning we're going to have some fun, and for those of you who are on social media, I'm going to take a selfie, because this group is the selfie generation, aren't they? They're the me generation? No? Anybody? You guys want to smile? See if we can get something going here. Smile, 1, 2, 3. There we go. Right. You guys can follow us. If you follow us on social media, you can see that this week. We'll post it online. But the me generation, the millennial generation, the selfie generation were actually originally coined as Generation Y, following X, obviously. But they were changed after they were discovering some character traits that related them more towards this millennial. 1984 to about 1995, maybe even as late as 2000. This group is sometimes known to be narcissistic and also very entitled. And so those are some of the coins that they've been given over the years, but they're not all bad. They're pretty good as well. For those of you who are wondering how old I am, I'm actually born in 1983, and so that puts me at 34. I'm on the cusp between a millennial and a Gen Xer, but I've never felt like I've fallen into a millennial category, and I've never really felt like I've fallen into a Gen Xer. And so I'm like on the cusp. I kind of identify with one group, not the other. But apparently I'm not the only person who thinks like that, because recently social scientists announced that there's a whole new micro-generation, simply saying that there's not enough people and not enough years to be considered a full generation. And we're born between 1977 and 1983. We're called the Zennials. And it just happens to coincide with the release of the Star Wars trilogy, I'm just saying. But I relate more to a Zennial. So we kind of have the cynicism of a Gen Xer, but we have the optimism and the drive of a millennial in there. So these micro-generations are in there as well, and I kind of feel like, I was just going to tell you that because I feel like I'm more a Zennial than I am a millennial or a Gen Xer. That's 1977 and 1983. The next one are mostly the kids in schools, Generation Z. These kids were born with a screen. They've been in front of a screen pretty much their whole lives. My children are amazing on the iPad. By the time Taylor was 2, she could unlock an iPad, find her game, educational game, and play, do everything that she needed to do on that iPad. It really is incredible. In fact, it's incredible to watch her teach my mother how to use her iPhone. It's just amazing to see a 6-year-old showing, 5-year-old showing my mother what to do on her phone. They're 1995 all the way through to 2014. And if you're doing the maths and you're still tracking along, 2014 was about 3 years ago, right? So what came after then? Well, social scientists have recently announced that there's the next group of coming out, which is going to be Generation Alpha. Don't you love that picture? I love that. Generation Alpha, and they're predicting, again, these kids haven't even started school yet, okay? So just some predictions about this. They're predicting that they're going to do every single bit of their shopping online. They're predicting that they're going to be completely comfortable with social media, that they're going to be the first generation that has experienced very little human contact in its interactions. And they reckon that this generation is going to be highly entrepreneurial, that we're going to see businesses that we haven't even dreamed of coming forward in the next couple of years. But again, these kids are only like 3 years old, so we might only see this in 20, 30, 40 years' time. So that's what we have. That's a quick recap of all the generations. You might not have known where you fitted in. Maybe you do know now. You know kind of where you are. But as we're talking about the generations and we're talking about this idea of helping the next gen win, my friend John Woodall says this. He says that you rise and you fall on your definitions. That you rise and you fall on your definitions. And so I feel as we kick off this conversation, remember this conversation is going to happen for 4 weeks, I would love for us just to define a couple of things that we can all have kind of a platform, kind of a same base to be able to work off as we move forward in this discussion of helping the next gen win. And so what we want to determine first is a good idea is who is the next gen? Some of you, as you've heard this topic, helping the next gen win, you've immediately gone, well, it's the millennials, or it's Gen Z coming up behind us. I want to say to you that that's not the definition we want to use when we're talking about helping the next gen win. What we want to say is this, that in helping, who is the next gen? It's anyone who is coming behind you. Anyone who is coming behind you. They're in a different season of life to you. Maybe they're right behind you in age. Maybe they're right behind you in their space of work. Anybody who is coming behind you. So this series isn't just for the 60-year-olds or the 50-year-olds or the 40-year-olds. You can be in high school and have some people coming alongside behind you. You can be moving into retirement and have some people coming behind you. Who is the next gen? The next gen is anyone who is coming behind you. The next thing I think which is worthwhile to define for us is what is a win? What does a win look like? What does it look like to win? If we're going to help the next generation win, what does a win look like? And I think this is something that maybe we could talk for quite a long time about, right? I mean, we could probably spend the next 20 minutes, maybe the next hour talking about this, because I don't know what you were told growing up about what a win might look like, but I know that many of us have been told, we learnt, we have come to believe that if I get a good education, I can get a good job, I can get a good house, I can get a good car, I can get a good wife, I can maybe have some good kids, and then I can buy another house, I can maybe get a different spouse, I can maybe get some different kids, I don't know, I can get a different car. And some of us have been told that he who has the most toys when he dies wins, right? But I think that we all know someone who had a lot of toys and they died, and we had this nagging feeling that they didn't win in life. And so what is a win? What does a win actually look like? What is our definition if we're going to help the next generation win? What does a win look like? I want to propose for our conversation that a win is not this. A win is not improving a standard of living. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against you improving your standard of living. I mean, some of you grew up without running water in your house, and you want running water in your house. I get that. Some of you didn't have a car growing up, and you want to have your children have a car as they get to go around and get to move around the space. I'm not against improving a standard of living. I drove a 1976 Volkswagen Beetle with a whale fin on the back, the original sport bug with a rounded dash and the vinyl dashboard. But when I got that car, it was a body, it was 2 chassis, and an engine. And I spent years fixing that thing up, only for my wife not to be seen dead driving with me in the car. And so I sold that car, and I bought myself something that she would get in the car with me with, which was a City Golf. And I've loved that City Golf for years. I'm not against improving a standard of living, but I want to say that if we're going to help the next generation win, helping the next generation win is not improving their standard of living. Rather, I want to say that it is this, that it is providing a standard for living. That it is not improving a standard of living, it is rather improving a standard, providing a standard for living. And so you're in church today, and so I'm going to propose one idea for the next couple of minutes. You're going to find it in the Bible. Yes, this is a book, and it's shiny. But this is my study Bible, and the reason I show you this is because we're going to take something out of Psalm 78. Now, some of you have got an app, you've got YouVersion, you've got, you Google, you can just Google anything, but this is what a Bible looks like. Some of you have them at home. Some of you may not have seen one of these ever in your life, but this is what a Bible looks like. Yes, this is a thick version, but this is what a Bible looks like. And Psalms, if you open up your Bible, in the middle of the book, you're going to be in the middle of Psalms. You're going to find Psalms right in the middle. And so if you want to go and read Psalm 78 today or maybe this week, open your book in the middle, open your Bible in the middle, and you're going to be roundabout in Psalms. And what's amazing about this is this Psalm 78 is written by a man named Asaph, and Asaph spent a whole bunch of time in the court of David. David was a king of Israel at about 1000 BC, I think. And what's amazing about this is that Asaph, in the court of King David, you can go and find in Old Testament history, you can go read about them and what they did and what they get up to outside of this book. And so it's amazing that we have inside of the Bible some ideas of what Asaph might have written many, many years ago. So I want to unpack this idea for us a little bit. One idea out of Psalm 78 as we go through, as we discuss this idea of helping the next generation win. Asaph says this, he puts this nugget in the first couple of verses. He says, "O my people, listen to my instructions. Open your ears to what I am saying, for I will speak to you in a parable. I will teach you hidden lessons from our past." Now I need to just say, this was written at about 1000 BC, okay? He's talking already about things that happened in the past. He's talking about Israeli history that has happened about 200-300 years before that. So this is taking place. He's talking about things that have happened 1200, 1300 BC. Asaph carries on, and he says, we're going to tell stories we have heard and known, stories from our ancestors handed down to us. Now, that's an interesting term. In some translations of the Bible, that says fathers, that says families, that says mothers, that says ancestors handed down to us. Now, I tell you that because, as statistics go, half of you in this room didn't grow up with a father. As statistics go, half of you in this room didn't grow up with a father. He may have been around, but he might not have been present. Some of you in this room, if you had a father growing up, the majority of those fathers were probably silent. And you might have hit your midlife and you've realized that you're kind of still figuring this whole thing out by yourself. That's the statistics. And I'm not trying to be harsh on men, because some of the things that we have learned over the years have come from our mothers as well. But Asaph here is talking about the things that we have heard and the things that we have been taught from our parents, from our adults, from the adults we have in our lives. And so I want to ask you, what have you been told? What are some of the things that has been told to you by a parent, by a grandparent, by an adult in your life? What has been told to you that you think, maybe some of those things that you've been taught, you're still unraveling in your life, like that didn't work for me? What are some things that are in your life that you have been taught, that you've been living by your entire life, that came from the generation above you? Asaph carries on and he says that we will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation. In fact, the whole idea for the series came from this psalm. The idea that we are to go out and tell the next generation what is going on. What are we going to tell them? Asaph tells us, he says, we're going to tell them about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about his power and his mighty wonders. What's amazing about this is that Asaph's talking about the Israeli history that's happened, and in this moment he's actually referring to some of the stories of Moses. How Moses went to the edge of the Red Sea with the Israelites, parted the Red Sea with God's power and his might and his wondrous miracles, and the Israelites were able to cross the Red Sea on dry ground. That God provided them food in the desert while they were roaming around for 40 years, that he was able to crack open rocks and have gushing water come out of them, that God was able to do those things, all symbols and signs that Jesus was going to come as he did in the New Testament. But he's saying that we're to tell these children the glorious deeds of the Lord, about his power and his mighty wonders. And he carries on and says, for God issued his laws to Jacob. He gave his instructions to Israel. He commanded our ancestors to teach them to our children. Now, if you're tracking along, there are two things going on here. There's telling and there's teaching, right? We're supposed to tell our kids about the deeds of God, his power and his wonders, and we're supposed to teach our children about his commandments, about his law, the instructions that he has handed down to the people of Israel. Is why would we do this? He says, so that the next generation might know them, even the children not yet born, and they in turn will teach their own children. If you're an educator here, happy Teachers' Day for this past week. I hope you've enjoyed some time off. You're going back to school tomorrow. We'll pray for you. But I just want to point out something that I find very fascinating in this instance right here. Asaph's talking about this idea of telling and teaching, right? We're telling and we're teaching. But what he's telling you right here is he's talking about 4 generations. He's talking about grandparents who are telling parents, parents who are telling children, and children who are telling grandchildren. You're tracking along, that's an amazing, amazing thing. The involvement of these families in being able to pass down information, being able to tell the next generation, being able to teach the next generation. And then Asaph says this, he says, so each generation should, and he says that there is a result of this. And this is the result. He says that each generation should set its hope anew on God, not forgetting his glorious miracles and obeying his commands. Set its hope anew is simply just trusting in God, not forgetting his glorious miracles, remembering the things that God has done for not only the people of Israel in Asaph's instance, but what he has done for us individually over the years that we have been alive, and then obeying his commands, simply obeying the things that God has taught each of us to do. And so if we're going to help the next generation win, I want to propose for us that the standard of what we want to do is this, that we want to provide for them a standard for living rather than improving their standard of living. That we want to provide for them a standard for living rather than improving their standard of living. Now, Asaph referred to three things. He said we trust in God, we need to obey his commands, and we do not forget his deeds. And I want you to think about those three things quickly. Think about putting your trust in God, not forgetting his deeds, and obeying his commands. Those three things. Who are you putting your trust in? Are you putting your trust in God, or are you putting your trust in yourself? Who are you putting your trust in? Not forgetting his deeds. What are you doing to remember the things that God has done in your life? What are you doing to remember the things that God has done for the people, for his chosen people over the years? What are you doing to remember to obey his commands? What are you doing to obey those commands that he has given you? You might say, well, I don't even know any of his commands. Well, I would say to you, look up here again. This is the Bible. Remember, Asaph's talking right in the middle, right? He's talking right here in the middle. He's saying we want to obey God's commands. And you say, well, what commands? I would say that everything up until this point, everything in the first half of the book, the Old Testament. You might say, well, that's a very thick book. There must be a lot of commands in there. Yes, there are. There are over 600. But I would say that maybe we just need to start with the first 10. Maybe we just need to start with do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not have any other gods, do not worship any idols, take 24 hours off every 7 days and keep it holy, that we would honor our father and mother, that we would not spread false testimony or slander against our neighbor, that we would not covet our neighbor's wife, his things, his house. Maybe we should just start with the first 10. But what happens after the first half of the book is that there's the New Testament. As Jesus comes in the second half of this book. And Jesus says that if you love me, you will keep my commands. And Jesus says this, he says, a new commandment I give you, that you would love one another as I have loved you. Maybe we just start there. But what's amazing is that God gave us this book to say this is how it's done, this is how life works. If you want to know how to set the next generation up for win, if you want to be able to remember what God has done, if you want to be able to obey my commands, it's all in here. We just need to read it. So what's amazing to me is that we have that opportunity to be able to read that we have those things with us, that we can be able to have an opportunity to be able to dive into those three things, that we can place our trust in God, that we can not forget his deeds, and that we can obey his commands. That's really what Asaph says we are to teach to the next generation. So if you're sitting here and you're thinking, well, I want to help the next generation win, I'm interested, I want to try and help the next generation win in some way, what can I do? I'm glad you asked, because I think that there are three things. And I'm going to tell you three things now, and I want you just to kind of have a heads up. The next 3 weeks are going to be very, very practical. If you're interested in this topic, you know someone who is in the next gen, you know someone who's passionate about helping the next gen, the next 3 weeks are going to be highly, highly practical. And so today I want to give you three practical things that you could do today, maybe this week, as you consider helping the next generation win. The first one is you would choose to help. That might seem like a simple thing, right? That I choose to help. But honestly, so many of us live in a world where we're focused on ourselves. And maybe you've been in a season of your life where you've been self-focused rather than others-focused. But I know this to be true about every single one of you and every single person on this planet, that we were made to receive love and give love away. That we were never meant to receive love and keep love. That we were meant to receive love and give that love away to other people. And so if we could become less self-focused and more others-focused, we are going to be able to help the next generation win. The second thing is to write it down. Now, so I don't know about you, but I'm not a journaler. I don't write my thoughts and prayers and dreams down in a book. That is not something I do. But I do recognize this, that if I do not write it down, I'm going to forget it. So I have notes in my phone. I've got notes in this moleskin that I've been keeping for almost 10 years that I write all kinds of things down in. I have scribbles all over my desk. My staff sometimes try to throw paper away, and I tell them no, because there's something important in there. I don't know what it is, but I wrote it down, and it must be important. But write it down. And you might sit there and be having an argument with me in your head saying, but you don't know my story. You don't know what's gone on in my life. I don't have anything to write down. I guarantee that you have something to write down. You might say to me, well, I don't have anything good to write down. I only have things of not to do, some just bad things that I've done in my life that I would say to the next generation not to do. Well, you could serve as a really good bad example to someone else. That's all you might be able to do, is to be able to serve as a really good bad example. But you would be helping the next generation win by writing those things down and telling them what not to do. A couple of years ago, I did a men's small group curriculum called Seven questions that rattle in the minds of most men. And we talked about who we are in the context of 5 things, and I'll put these up on the screen here. My big 5: who we are in life, self, marriage, I'm a husband, family, I'm a father, work, I'm a boss, I'm an employer, I'm an employee, church, all the roles we perform here, give, serve. We want to invite people. We want to connect in community group. We want to be leaders in those contexts. As you look at those 5 things, I would love to encourage you to just take those 5 things and write something down about what you believe in each of those environments, what you have learned in each of those environments. And I recognize that some of you here today are not married. Some of you do not have kids. I want you to go back and look at what you observed from your parents, what you observed from your family, because I guarantee you that there are some things that you grew up with that you would do differently, right? You could write those things down, and as you want to move towards the next generation, helping the next generation win, you could teach those things to the next generation as well. So the first thing to do is to choose to help, be more others-focused, to write it down, and the last one is this: to be the vision. Put that in another way is to model it, to be able to say, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to be able to model what we're going on here. Because truthfully, some of you just need to be the vision of trusting God when it is easier for each and every one of us to just give up and walk away, to break faith with God. We just need to be the vision of keeping trust in God. Some of us need to just be the vision of obeying His commands, even when we work in a world where it is so countercultural to do that. That we would just be the vision, that we would be the model of what that might look like in the world. Some of us just need to be the vision of not forgetting what God has done in our lives, of knowing that He is faithful, that He has come through for me before, and so He will do so the same this time around. For some of us, we just need to be the vision. We need the vision of not obeying His commands, not forgetting His deeds, and remembering to trust in Him. So if we're going to help the next generation win, if we want to help the next generation win, we need to provide for them a standard for living rather than improving their standard of living. And you might look at that, and the reason I can say that is because I've seen this. I have a guy in my small group named Jason, and he was sharing his story a couple of weeks ago as we were getting to know one another as we started a new group. And he started telling his story, and I picked this up completely through what was going on. That there is a couple in this church named Patrick and Stacy Moore, and they, when he was in high school, decided that they wanted to pour into the next generation. That they were going to make themselves available to Jason. That as Jason went through life and he had struggles, that he could go to Patrick and Stacy and ask them advice. That they were going to be there for him when he was going through something. That they were teaching him and they were telling him things that it was going to help him in life. Fast forward a couple of years later, he's gone overseas, had a gap year, come back, started at university, started coming back to church. And he said, hey, I want to do the same thing. I remember what Patrick and Stacey did for me, and I want to do the same for the next generation. So he came, he signed up to be a small group leader here at South Point for a group of grade 4 boys. And he tracked with those boys the whole way through grade 4, whole way through grade 5. Then as they moved to transit, he tracked with them through transit. He tracked with them through high school. Those boys are now in matric. They're running their matric finals in a couple of days' time. And he still keeps contact with them, still does things with them, and still spends time investing in them. And what's amazing to me is that as Jason was working overseas for a little while, Jason was so passionate about helping these kids and being involved in these kids' lives that he would wake up at midnight in the States. He would phone in via Skype to be a part of a small group with them on a Sunday morning. He wanted to help the next generation win by telling them and teaching them. He wanted to provide for them a standard for living rather than improving their standard of living. What's even more amazing to me is that a couple of years ago, those grade 4 boys were grown up enough to want to start serving by themselves. And they started serving in Wumberland. They started serving with a group of preschool kids in Wumberland, and they've tracked with those boys all the way through Wumberland, and then through the last few years, been able to be with them in Upstreet. Those boys are writing matric this year, and they're pouring into the next generation. They're in high school. All because Patrick and Stacy believed that they could pour into the next generation of Jason, and that Jason believed that they could pour into those boys in grade 4 as well. And my hope is that those boys that they're tracking with in grade 1 and grade 2, that they would be able to pour into the next generation at some point as well. So I hope that you're going to be able to choose to help, that you're going to write it down, and that you are going to want to, at some point, be the vision of what this might look like. That as you receive love, you're able to give it away. And that we're able to help the next generation win by providing them a standard for living rather than just improving their standard of living. That's really what we're going to be discussing for the next couple of weeks. And I hope that you're going to join us on the journey as we unpack a couple more ideas. Next week, we're going to talk about some more generational stuff, specifically how about we interact with people and how we can really set up the next generation for a win. The following week, we're going to have a guest speaker you might have heard on radio. Kirsty Scully is going to be with us to talk about some finances and how we can really help the next generation win with regards to finances. And the final week, we're going to talk specifically about how some practical things that we can do in any arena of life that can help the next generation win as it relates to those things. One of the things I'd love for you to do is if you're sitting here this morning and you're not a parent, I want you to try and get this out of your head that this is just for parents. This is not. This is for educators. This is for aunts and uncles. This is for parents, for people who you want to serve with other generations at work, that you maybe want to serve in a nonprofit environment. This series, Helping the Next Generation Win, is for every single one of us because we all interact with people who are on the spectrum of someone who is coming behind us. And we can help them win by providing them a standard for living rather than just improving their standard of living. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, thank you that we can be at a place where we can talk about that there are a whole bunch of people coming along behind each and every one of us. Father, whether it be one, whether it be a group of people, whether we be leading in an organization, whether it be leading a team, whether it be just leading a family. Father, whether we be studying at university, whether we be just be in high school. Father, there is someone who's coming along behind us. And Father, as we consider over the next couple of weeks and today that we would be able to help the next generation win, Father, that you would help us to be able to choose to help those people, that we would write those things down that we have learned, and Father, that we would be able to be the vision, that we would be the vision of someone who is putting their trust in you every day, be the vision of someone who is not forgetting the deeds that you have done in our lives and in your people's lives over the years, and Father, that we would continue to obey your commands. Father, I want to thank you for Patrick and Stacy, and thank you for Jason, and thank you for those boys who are still believing that they can make a difference as they reach down into the generation that's coming behind them, and they're able to help those kids learn to trust you, learn to obey your commands, and learn about how great the great things that you have done over the years. Heavenly Father, give us the wisdom to know what to do and the courage to ultimately do it. Pray these things in your precious Son's name. Amen.